How to find the perfect co-founder and make it last. The right co-founder can be the difference between unbelievable success and utter complete failure. I've been with my co-founder for 3 years now, and we wouldn't be where we are today without each other. I'm going to give you the keys so you can find co-founders just like I found mine. There's 5 questions to answer. Do you even need a co-founder? What to look for in a co-founder? How to find a co-founder? How to test the relationship? And then how to make it last. Let's go straight in. So first, do you even need a co-founder? And I might be about to pop your ego here, sorry in advance, but it's always somebody who cherry picks one example of a founder who did it all themselves and is so amazing. But in reality, in the startup space, most people have co-founders. Solo founders are the exception, not the rule. Most successful startups have 2 to 3 co-founders. 94% of the top 50 on Y Combinator had more than one founder. Yes, theoretically, you can build a massively successful company by yourself, and people have done it. But you're playing on ultra hard mode. You need to be world-class at multiple different skills or be able to hire people exceptionally well, because it's tough enough with co-founders. Often, companies will have more than one co-founder, but it's only one in the spotlight, so you don't realize about the important work of the other people as part of that founding team, and you underplay it. Simply, it's better to have a great co-founder than be a solo founder, but of course, it's better to be a solo founder than to have the wrong co-founder who's toxic and drags your day down. Let's put 2 high-level buckets for co-founders: technical and non-technical. Generally, you need both to make the company work. Non-technical founders can hire development agencies, they can hire technical people, but the problem is they won't know if they're being overcharged, whether things are taking longer than they need to, and they won't know if the quality of the code under the covers is any good. Now, of course, you can hire people and you can have somebody you trust to be able to do this. It just makes it more difficult. Non-technical founders can teach themselves how to code, especially in the world of AI. Sandrine Ferron-Zhang taught herself how to code as a non-technical founder, and she put together the first version of a product herself, and they've now scaled to Series A, and obviously she has a team behind her that's been able to take that further. But by learning it herself, she was able to make those first early steps and to make better judgments. It's so much faster in the early days for one of the founders at least to have the technical skills to make the gap between ideation and execution much quicker. A technical founder, on the other side, can build a world-class product, but if they don't have to sell it, they don't have to market it, they don't have to raise funding, then it's not going to go anywhere, right? So technical founders can try to teach themselves other skills. And because they're softer skills, you'd think it might be easier, but it really depends on the personality traits. The challenge is, for non-technical founders more, is that while you can correct messaging, you can correct branding, if you start with a fundamentally bad code base that can't be scaled, then it can be very expensive to correct that later down the line. So generally, technical founders have the edge and a high demand than non-technical founders. But let's look in depth about the pros and cons of having a co-founder and not having a co-founder. The first point is about skill coverage. The second advantage is sharing the load. Even if everybody in your founding team is a superstar, there's going to be all the different areas that somebody needs to take over that they don't necessarily want to. This is the admin tasks, the legal tasks, the tax side. So right at the start, you can't really afford, in many cases, to hire people for that or to spend lots of money on professionals. So one of you's got to work that out. And right at the beginning, even if one of you is a technical founder and one of you is non-technical, or you've got multiple technical founders, have you done that team, somebody's going to need to learn the tasks. And because nobody wants to do them, at least if there's multiple of you, you can spread that out. So for example, I have nothing to do with the legal side and very little to do with the tax side. My co-founder's taken on that burden, so I don't need to. And what's good too is that when you split those responsibilities, if you trust your co-founder correctly, you don't need to worry about anything they're doing, and they don't need to worry about anything you're doing, which gives you that bit more peace of mind. And in a crazy world of startups, knowing that there's some bits you just don't have to worry about makes all the difference. Next pro is the emotional support. And so many people on LinkedIn and social media overlook just how brutal the early stage of startups is. You get rejected all the time, you get people telling you that your idea is going nowhere, and there's many times you might potentially give up, right? And having somebody on that journey with you, who's seeing those ups and downs, who is feeling those punches the way you're feeling them can really help, because you have somebody who can relate to you. And when you're a bit down, they can help you. When they're a bit down, you can help them. And you just have somebody in that journey with you, right? It makes everything just that bit easier. Last week, I had a few difficult days for personal reasons, and I snapped at my co-founder. Not proud of that at all. But because he understood what was going on in my personal life, he could handle that in a very mature way, which really helped then, right? Because then I realized, okay, I shouldn't have said that in that way, and we could then bond again. But because I had that person around me who understood the stress I'm going through, then it made my life so much easier. The final pro I'm going to highlight is the ability to challenge each other. And you might have heard of the idea of founder mode, right? Is that a founder can just move so much quicker than an employee because they have that ability to make a decision and not need to worry about somebody above them who can overturn that decision or is going to judge that decision, right? And the problem is when you're a solo founder is that founder mode can both be a blessing and a curse. Because if your employees aren't at that stage where they can challenge you, you can make some really dumb mistakes. Whereas when you have somebody in the company who's at that same level as you, who you're not answerable to, but you have to respect their decision, right? Because you both own the company together. It means that they can challenge your thinking. They have the same emotional investment as you, and they can make you think in different ways, right? And to have somebody you can brainstorm with who's got perfect alignment in the rewards means that you come up with new ideas, and maybe you respect their opinion, listen to their opinion more than you would others. It's the magic of accountability. Now, the other side, the cons. First up is conflict. This is the obvious one. There are so many co-founders I know who secretly hate each other and they resent each other, and in the public sphere, they pretend to think it's all perfect and fine. So when you're in this situation, just imagine that emotional toll it takes on you, right? That's very difficult, very draining. And if you don't have a co-founder, that's not possible, right? So this is the challenge of when things go wrong, it can go really badly wrong. And if you are that personality who is this person who can take on all of the tasks and thinks you're capable of doing that, then maybe being a solo founder will be better for you, especially if you know sometimes you're disagreeable and you can get into arguments a lot. The second point is contagion, is that as co-founders, your reputations are linked together. So if your co-founder does something underhand, something dirty, something illegal, then now people are thinking, well, if they've done that, maybe you do that too. So you've got to pick your co-founder very carefully and make sure that integrity is aligned. If they have some kind of a scandal or they act in a certain unethical way, you're now going to be painted with the same brush. So be very careful about that. And if your reputation is very important to you, then you need to act accordingly when picking your co-founder. The worst thing is if your co-founder scams you and then you look either stupid that you didn't work it out or that you're pretending you didn't know and you're part of the scam too. So it's a bad place to be in. Third is slower decision making. One of the common mistakes, and we do this ourselves, is where you make the founders co-CEOs because both of you are trying to be nice. The problem is that if both of you need each other's sign-off to make every decision, everything is so much slower because you can't act autonomously. So you need to be able to trust each other to make decisions, otherwise you're just bottlenecks. And the more co-founders you have, the bigger a problem this becomes. Because if you need for certain decisions everybody to be on board, if one person is slower to make that decision, they can slow things down for all of you. Next con, hopefully I'm not scaring you too much yet, is equity dilution. So if it's your company, you own 100%. But people forget is that every time you go through a round, you're giving up a proportion of your shares. So it's not uncommon if you have like 5 co-founders to own barely any of the company by the time it eventually IPOs. So this is something to think about, especially if you can add more than 3, let's say, co-founders, because you're going to be doing all of this hard work. And maybe if there's 4 co-founders, you own 25% of that. And you're going to own so much less as you go through the rounds. So it's definitely something to think about, right? Is that with one co-founder, 50-50. If they're going to be 1 + 1 is more than 2, perfect. But that equation doesn't always continue the further you go ahead with the more and more co-founders. Final con for today is cash flow. So what happens when you will need to take salaries? Let's say, and especially at the beginning, you're probably going to pay each other the same. So when you're trying to pay salaries, and let's say one person really needs it, the other person doesn't, awkward, difficult position. But if you're paying each of the founders a founder's salary when you're barely making any money, and then you need to raise more money because you want to pay each of the co-founders a certain amount, that's making your journey harder and harder. So you need to understand, is that for those co-founders, are they worth the additional burden at that early stage? Harsh way to put it, but you've got to think of it like that, right? Is that every time you're making revenue, part of that revenue is going to go to one of the other co-founders too. And if they're not pulling their weight, then they're net drawing from the company rather than adding to it. In my eyes, the pros outweigh the cons, and history shows that, and you see so many successful companies, most of the people I've interviewed on the podcast have had a co-founder. So let's now look into what should you look for in your co-founder. Too often I talk to people who are looking for a co-founder, but they haven't really worked out a selection criteria of what means success, right? What is that person's traits going to be that's going to make them the perfect person for you? So let's break this down. Before telling everybody you need a co-founder, you should have your criteria of what you need. And I'm going to break this down into 4 different areas. And you want to make sure that whoever you're going to work with meets your criteria in all of these areas. First is the founder mindset. You're wasting your time trying to convince somebody to quit their job if that's not the phase of life they're in, if that's not who they want to be. Don't force them. There will be a huge amount of uncertainty and a high likelihood it's all going to fail. And you know what they say about farts? If you're trying too hard to push them, it's probably... Your problem is going to be separating out those who think they have the founder mindset versus those who actually do. Because some people will fall in love with the honeymoon phase, but can't stick at it long term. Analyze with an investor hat on. Would you invest in this person? Are they resilient, curious, focused, hardworking, self-aware, good at communication? You can check out a previous video I've done right here, which has everything you need to know about good co-founder traits. Number 2 is values. You can't forget these. Somebody could be the perfect founder in terms of their traits, but if you can't work well together, if you don't mesh right, then you're doomed to fail. And this comes about things beyond business. What do you value in life? What's your opinions on things? Because if somebody has a really opposite opinion to you and you can't respect them because of that, then it's not going to work out, is it? You have to work out your tolerance for working with people who've got different values to you. What are your morals? What are you willing to sacrifice? What are they willing to sacrifice? Are they aligned? It's very easy to have pent up resentment where you feel like your co-founder is doing something in a way which you're not proud of and you don't like that it reflects on you. You have to be able to trust and respect each other to last. Third is a long-term vision. This video is aimed at startup founders, people who want to build massive companies and transform their industry or even transform the world. If your co-founder is happy with a smaller business that maybe gets them a bit of salary, but it doesn't really change the world, but you want to change the world, you're going to have conflict. It's not going to work out. So you need to make sure that both of you have the same end goal. Because if you're working towards one thing and they're working towards another thing, you can't get somewhere in the middle if it's going to make both of you unhappy. You have to understand and define carefully what is success to you. What is the point of what you're trying to build? Why are you trying to build? And fourth is the complementary skill sets. We've already mentioned technical and non-technical co-founders, but it's also different personality traits. Is that, do you have somebody who is willing to go out there and is more sociable and somebody who's less sociable? What are the different mixes of that? And does it benefit you where your weaknesses are covered by their strengths and their strengths cover your weaknesses? The other key thing here is about what you're willing to learn, because it could be that you're not the best developer at the beginning, but you're willing to learn and grow in that area, and that's an area which the other person isn't really willing to grow and learn. Then you still have that alignment of where you're heading. And when you're looking at the skills too, you also have to be realistic, is that the very best potential co-founders are probably going to be out of your reach. Because let's look at this like football or soccer if you're American, is that if you're looking for a striker and you're a defender, then you're not going to be able to buy the best striker in the world in their prime because they're going to be too expensive and they're going to have lots of other opportunities they have on their table. Whereas you might be able to get an up-and-coming person who's got a high potential, and you've got to look at that potential as well as just what they have currently done. Especially for the early stage, especially for unproven, you've got to get somebody who's on that same level as you, or if they're not on the same level as you have to work out that dynamics and hierarchy, which can be quite complicated. If there's one co-founder who's sold 10 companies and the other person who's coming into their first one. And working out that dynamic can be really complicated and very messy. Let's move on to where to find co-founders. Many co-founders know each other really well before they start, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they knew they were going to start a company together from that relationship. So here's 7 ways you can find your co-founder, starting from the warmest to the coldest. 1 is close family and friends. This is the obvious place to start. This is parents, siblings, partners, cousins, whatever it is. When this works, it's magic. You get to spend all of your time with the people that you love the most. One great example of this is Radha and her husband at Flashpack. They met each other on the first date. She told him about the idea. They both fell in love with the idea. They both built it together to a multi-8-figure business. And they also have a family together. So it's a beautiful love story that's worked out amazingly. Yet, when it goes wrong, it can go really badly wrong. Because you have to think about is that, can you work together? Even if you have a personal relationship together, sometimes that work relationship isn't quite the same. And you might find you really clash. And there's too many stories, especially for people from an Asian background, of where siblings have fought each other over business and fallen out, and then the kids don't see each other anymore. So you need to think about that contagion effect as well, right? If it goes wrong with the person you're trying to build a business with, can you handle that? And will you be able to sort out your differences in a mature and sophisticated way? Second is your acquaintances. So this can be people from school or work, people who you know, but you don't necessarily know that well. And it's less boom or bust because it's unlikely the relationship is going to go so sour that it ruins your entire life, as it might do if it was with a child or parent or partner. But at the same time, there is some effect because you might have mutual friends. Acquaintances are great because you can have that more professional relationship right from the start, and you also might have some experience of working with them, so you've been able to test that relationship a bit more. One nice example of this is Varun Banot and Sunil Jindal from Magic. So they both went to the same school but didn't know each other. Then they both went to work at the same startup. While there, they were there for several years. They built a good relationship and then started working on another startup themselves. And they've been together for several years now. They've also raised a Series A. And because they could test that relationship while working somewhere else, it meant that when they went on to do their own thing, they already knew each other's working styles. And acquaintances from work and school can be really good for this reason. Third is friends of your network. So this could be friends of family, friends of friends, friends of acquaintances. And again, this can work really well because if you trust that middle person's opinion, they can connect you to the right people. And I love this hack that one of my podcast guests told me, is that if there's somebody who'd love to be your co-founder, but you know they're never going to do it because they have their own thing going on right now, which they're really happy with, you ask them, can you tell me who are your 5 smartest friends? Who, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, who would you start a business with? Then you can use those recommendations and work further in that, right? One of those secret subtexts of this as well, if the person you're asking isn't willing to recommend you to the other person they're saying would be a good co-founder, that says a lot about you as well, right? So make sure you're the type of person that people want to work with, and then your friends and your family and your acquaintances are willing to recommend you for somebody else to build a company with you. Fourth is taking part in a program. There are programs designed specifically to help you find a co-founder. In the UK, there's Entrepreneurs First, there's Antler, there's Zinc VC. For some of these, you need to be a full-time entrepreneur. Other ones, you can be part-time. There's all different programs for all different reasons. They have some huge success stories, but you've also got to be realistic, right? You've got to see who on that program messaged well with you, but it's a good way to put yourself in that situation in a room full of people who all want the same thing, to find a co-founder that's going to work well for them. On a smaller scale, you can look at hackathons, and hackathons sometimes will allow you to put a random team together of people who signed up, and it's a good way to test, right? How did you work as a team? Under pressure, when you need to get something out quickly, how did they react? Was that the right way? that you'd want to work in the future. So accelerators, incubators, hackathons, there's all different ways that maybe you could find your co-founder. Fifth is getting yourself out there. I can't tell you how many people who ask me cold DMs, can you connect me to a co-founder? How am I meant to recommend you if I don't even know you? You need to do the work. Get out there, go to events, meet people, talk to people, keep connected to them, build a reputation. My organization, Bay HQ, runs tons of events in London. It's a perfect place to find co-founders. There are so many events in the startup space now, especially in major cities. And you can even join online events, online forums. When you think about personal brand, if you've got a good personal brand, then when you connect to these people and they then see what you're doing and online, you can build greater trust. And that trust helps you in finding a co-founder. Sixth is co-founder matching platforms. Y Combinator has one of these, but there are other ones as well that exist. And there's a lot of competing brands at the moment. So I don't want to give a nod to any particular brand just in case they aren't what they seem to be. And people have had different experiences with this, right? So I know some people have found it amazing, they found co-founders that way, and others who've said that the people on there aren't really to their taste. The only way to find out is by trying, right? Seventh and last is cold outreach. You can just randomly message people on LinkedIn. Now the challenge is that if they haven't said that they're looking for a co-founder, then you're just messaging people in the hope that they might be looking, and that you're just some random stranger. So it can work and it has worked, but ideally you can probably use one of the other methods first before resorting to just randomly messaging people. If it is your first company as well, you don't really have much to offer them. So when you're going out cold in that way, it's very difficult for them to say, oh, this person DM'd me randomly, I'm now going to spend the next 5 to 10 years of my life building a company with them. So let's say you found somebody you like. We're now going to look at how do you test them? How do you work out if they're really the right one or not? Think carefully about that 5 to 10 years I said there, right? Because when you're building a startup, it's not that, oh, you just do it for a bit. If it works out well, you're stuck with this person. So you want to test them well to begin with before diving in. Think of it like a marriage, right? Is that you don't just marry somebody straight after having one good chat with them at a coffee, right? You want to test them over time. You want to see how that relationship works. What happens when under stress? What happens when different things are going on? Does it still maintain the civility? Can you still work together? Can you still put the company first? Because as I said earlier, there's people I know who don't like their co-founders, but they're stuck with them and they still like the problem they're solving. They still like what they're trying to do. But every day at work is just a bit of a conflict and a bit of a battle. So don't be hasty. The first thing to do is to ask the awkward questions. Ask them the things that are on your mind. Ask them how much money they want to make. Ask them how many hours are they going to work. Ask them all of the things that could potentially be a conflict and get them out of the way up front. Do they plan on having a family? Do you plan on having a family? If you want to take some time out for paternity or maternity, will they have a problem with that? Because you want to ask the questions, maybe it's political views, whatever it is, where if they're going to have a problem with you, it's better to find out right at the beginning rather than later on down the line. Because what you want is somebody who's committed to the relationship in the same way you are. If, for example, both of you want to become parents soon, so you want to both manage it around your families, maybe you both already have children, maybe one of you has children, one of you is looking after carers. It's just making sure that you understand how that person's life is and having all of that up front, because you don't want to be getting angry or resentful at somebody later on because you didn't ask the question. From the values we talked about earlier, what are the deal breakers? Is there anything that they'd be comfortable doing that you wouldn't be, or they have a style of work that's going to drive you up the wall? Just get out of the way. Better to just find it out, okay, this isn't going to work, and that's fine. And honestly, if you don't feel like you like somebody near the beginning, you probably should just trust your gut, because you can't have a working relationship if you don't trust somebody. If they pass this phase, move on to due diligence. Don't just take them at their word if they say that oh yeah, we love working this way, and oh yes, I love this, I love that. Because you just don't know, they could just be very charismatic. So you should do it a two-way thing, right? You should be talking to the people they've worked with in the past. You should talk to their previous clients. You can talk to all different manners of people that they've interacted with, and you should let them do the same. You should let them talk to anybody in your network, because if you're hiding something, what's the point? Like, it's going to come out eventually. And it's going to be so much worse if it comes out 3 years down the line that you pretended something on something on your CV. What's going to happen then? They're going to hate you for it, right? So just get all of that trust thing out in the open, be that transparent person. And when you're that transparent person, everything will go so much smoother. And you can also demand that of them too. If you're being transparent and they're not, it's a massive red flag. Okay, so they've passed the first 2 tests. They've passed the awkward question test. They've passed the due diligence test. Now it's time to try to actually do a project with them. And this can be somewhat small, right? It doesn't need to be massive, but do part of the work together, right? Before you've even incorporated, before you've done any of the legal stuff, just build something which is fairly self-contained. Maybe it takes a couple of weeks, maybe it takes a month, and see how you work on that side of things, right? Does it seem like you can imagine this being a person that you want to continue working with for the next 5 to 10 years? Or is it like, I can't, like when they're at the office, it's so much nicer. And if it's nicer to be without them or when they've got a day off, again, not a good signal, right? But when you test these projects out, you can look for, do they take ownership? Are they communicating well with you? Are there lots of misunderstandings? And when you know these different extra data points, again, you really then understand, should I take this forward or should I not? And have regular check-ins too. Ask them, like, how do you think this is going? Do you think this is going well? Because if one of you thinks it isn't going well, just nip it in the bud and cut the relationship. So you've now passed 3 tests, awkward questions, due diligence, and the test project. And both of you still really love each other. You both really want to proceed. Now you've got to make sure you start on the right track. And I'll be honest, this is a case of do as I say rather than as I did. Because when I started out, we just thought it was going to be a small side project and then it expanded massively. And now we are where we are today. We also have a unique situation because my and my co-founders' families are connected. We're connected through mutual friends. There's so many different levels we have mutually assured destruction. So if either of us were act in a bad way, it's going to affect our relationship with so many other people that neither of us would do it, right? So we have that good relationship in that way, but if you don't have that relationship from before, even if you do, because right now, if something goes wrong between my co-founder, we have some big argument, we still have the danger. So it's always good to have everything written down and a proper co-founders agreement. It's really critical that everything is written down rather than decided over a bottle of whiskey and nobody can fully remember exactly what was agreed. Memory is fallible, whereas something written down avoids the potential conflicts and arguments of, but he said this, or but she said that. So when you're looking at this, it keeps that accountability. And all it takes is a simple email. Hey, we discussed this. Can you just send an email just to confirm that you agree that this is what we agreed? And once you've got that, you've now got a track record. So if there's any ever disputes in the future, you can refer back to that email again. For a proper co-founder agreement, what even goes in it? You can use standard templates online, but depending on the stage you're at, your potential income, it's good to involve a lawyer just to make sure that you have everything above the board. And this is especially true if one of you is a bit uncomfortable, because if you haven't done this before, it can be quite scary, right? And that's totally normal and totally understandable. And it can be all well to say like, oh, we should just do it, we should just trust each other. But sometimes it's good to have more of that formal documentation down. And speaking to a lawyer, if that puts somebody's mind at rest, that's worth it. Co-founder agreement includes roles and responsibilities, equity split investing schedule, decision-making process, conflict resolution processes, and also what happened in an exit. Splitting equity between co-founders is a spicy topic, and people have different ideas and different debates on this topic all the time. The YC argument is for every co-founder to have as close to equal equity as possible to keep them maximally motivated, and it reduces the chance one of them will disappear and not pull their weight. You might be worried about protecting yourself here, and this is what the vesting schedule does and cliffs. So generally what will happen, and it does vary and there's always different situations, but what you say is that the longer you stay at the company, the more shares you get. So if, for example, one co-founder leaves after 2 years, they wouldn't get the whole 50%. If it was 2 of you, they might only get 25%. Whereas if they stayed more than 4 years, which is around the standard, then they'd be able to keep all their shares. There's also something called a cliff, which is that if they leave within a certain amount of time, then they get nothing at all. So you could sign the agreement, and if one of the co-founders leaves after a week, they get nothing. They don't just get all the equity just because they signed on that one day. You want to essentially reward the founders that stick around for the longest. And this is hard to get your head around because we think at the beginning is the most important phase, because how often do you hear founders say, oh, the hardest thing is starting? That's not true. It's way harder the bigger the company gets. When you've got employees, when you've got investors. Starting actually is very little the overall value. So if you think about Meta, right? How much was Meta worth after a year? Not very much. 2 years? Not very much. After 10 years? Way more. After 20 years? Much, much more. So a lot of the value is accrued after product market fit, which for some companies takes a couple of years, but it could also be the third or fourth product. So if you start the initial company and you're part of a company which didn't even have revenue yet, why should you get the same portion of shares as a company person leading it when it's at a 5 billion valuation? As much as possible, it's good to just follow standards and to keep it simple rather than overcomplicating it, because the more complicated it is, the more it becomes a strain on the relationship too. And if you're not trusting your co-founders to be able to have that standard agreement, why are you working with them? So happy days, right? You've looked for the co-founder you want, you've been able to find them, and you're now able to test that relationship and get a co-founder agreement. But the work is only just starting, because maintaining that relationship is probably the hardest part of all. You have to keep working at it all the time. And when you think about why co-founders fall out, usually it's due to misaligned expectations, it's due to not having good communication, letting problems get pent up. And the other side is money, right? Because if you're in different financial situations, then that can cause increasing friction over time, where one of you needs to get paid and the other one doesn't, and one of you wants to put money into the company. And it's difficult, right? But the more you communicate, the more you talk about what's going on, the more you align those expectations, the better. So I'm going to give you 5 quick tips to maintain a good co-founder relationship. First, blur the professional and the personal. If you can understand what's going on in each other's personal lives, you'll understand that how it affects your day-to-day life, and you're much more lenient towards each other. You can humanize each other. Whereas when you just think of it as your co-founder as another business person, if they're not doing something right, they're underperforming, you're going to have less empathy for them. So when you understand what's going on in each other's lives, you can support each other there, you have that more holistic relationship, that can really help you. Otherwise, you might be arguing over stuff that just doesn't make any sense. Because I know my co-founder backs me both personally and professionally, I also back him personally and professionally too. And that trust and that strength of our bond has got us as far as we have. Second is a bias towards immediate candor. Just say what you're thinking. Don't let it build up. Don't wait till a quarterly review, whatever it is. The better you can just say what you're thinking and like, oh wait, and do it in a way which is non-confrontational, non-violent communication. You say like, oh, like I saw you did that. Could you just explain? I'm not quite sure I understand why you did it that way. The worst thing you can do is tell somebody, oh, I hate the way you've done this for the last 3 years. It's just like a marriage, right? Because then what happens in it is the snowball effect, is that if you don't tell somebody straight away what you're thinking, you then stack it up, and then when you eventually let rip, it's so much worse. Third is regular structured catch-ups. Especially as you're building that relationship and maybe you're not yet comfortable to tell them what you think straight away. These regular catch-ups can really help build that. So for the first 2 years of HQ, me and my co-founder had a half an hour catch-up every Monday morning where we just said what we're thinking, what the problems were, where our heads were at. And because we didn't know each other as well in the early days, this is usually where some of the problems came out and we could then deal with, because we had that time set aside. Now we don't have that catch-ups anymore because we see each other all the time and we both trust each other so much that we just say what we're thinking straight away and it doesn't build up. But to get to that stage, it can be useful to have those regular check-ins. Fourth is celebrating the wins, and this can be super difficult when you're heads down working and trying to build something massive. But if you don't celebrate together, then one of you might start to feel underappreciated and you don't feel like you're getting anywhere together. Whereas when you can take that step and look at like, wow, we've come so far together, it gives that halo effect and that glow that you're in this together, you've done well together, and you're both happy that each other have been able to do what you've been able to do. Finally is don't be afraid of getting outside third-party help. Because if you can save the relationship when it's not going well, that's much better. And obviously, prevention is better than a cure. So if you have somebody regularly, maybe it's a board member, maybe it's a mutual friend, who can just mediate and just check in on you and make sure that everything is going well, and maybe some of those things which you aren't comfortable bringing up, maybe in the presence of somebody else, you can address that in a less confrontational way. So don't be afraid of doing this. I know many co-founders who go to what is essentially co-founder therapy, and it's helped their company survive and their companies thrive. Now, of course, sadly, not every co-founder relationship will work out, and it doesn't have to be a catastrophe. Being able to manage a breakup well is another skill, which hopefully you never have to use, but at the same time, you should still know what to do. And in that co-founder agreement, you should have all of the things in place to be able to manage that, and so both of you know what's happening and there's less disputes. And you want to try to stick to what's written as best as you can. When it goes ugly, then you can have litigation and fees. You can have investors being worried and concerned and no longer backing you. You can have your team members who again might think, oh, is this now a sinking ship? So if you can be responsible and manage it in a controlled way, and I know many people have done this, I know many people where, say for example, Faisal, so he was one of the co-founders of Algebra. When they raised a Series B, he stepped away to found another company. But he did it in a way which respected his other co-founders, and they could manage that in a slow transition. He could make sure that investors were confident in the future of the company, and he could showcase it as a way that's best for the company for that to happen. And it's not uncommon at all for people who started the company not to be there in several years' time. And the big thing comes down to is emotional maturity. So if it does look it's heading that way, where maybe the co-founder relationship isn't going to work, don't let it fester, don't let it get worse. Bring up the conversation, get your outside third parties involved, get your board involved, get your lawyers involved, get your investors involved, and try to do it in a way as mature and responsible as possible to minimize the fallout and the damage. And ideally, if it's you dropping out, then be the person who can leave that bridge still there. If it's your co-founder dropping out, understand that their circumstances might be different and try to be empathetic towards them. And that's not always easy. But in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, you might realize that whatever happened was for the best, and it's better to have broken that relationship that can then continue something which wasn't going to work. So I hope you found this video useful. I've tried my best to cover all the different main areas. So why you need a co-founder, what you should look for, how to find one, how to test one, and then how to maintain a good relationship. And finally, a bit of bonus there about how to break up the relationship in a mature way. If this has been helpful for you, make sure you subscribe, join the BHQ, it's totally free, you can find the link in the comments, and see you next time.